Today, I'm going to tell you one of the most fascinating and mysterious stories in history, the mystery of the Titanic. You've probably heard about the Titanic before. Maybe you've seen the famous movie or read about it in books. But I promise you, after listening to this, it will feel like you're hearing the story for the first time. I'm going to share everything in great detail, and some things might even surprise you. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of the Titanic. By the end of this story, you will not only learn about the Titanic but also improve your English skills. The Titanic was not just a ship, it was a dream, a symbol of luxury, success, and human achievement. Let's go back to the early 1900s, when ships were the main way to travel across oceans. At that time, two shipping companies, the White Star Line and the Cunard Line, were competing to build the best and most luxurious ships in the world. Cunard Line had two fast and famous ships, Lusitania and Mauretania. These ships were known for their speed, but White Star Line wanted something different. They didn't just want speed, they wanted luxury, comfort, and size. So, they decided to build three ships that would be the largest and most luxurious in the world: Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. Out of these, Titanic became the most famous, but not for the reasons the company had hoped. The Titanic was built in Belfast, Northern Ireland, by a shipbuilding company called Harland and Wolff. Construction began in March 1909 and took almost 3 years to complete. Thousands of workers labored day and night to build this giant ship. It was 882 feet, 269 meters, long and 175 feet, 53 meters, tall, almost the length of 3 football fields placed end to end. Now let's talk about why the Titanic was called unsinkable. The ship had 16 watertight compartments, and engineers believed that even if 4 of these compartments filled with water, the ship would still float. This technology was so advanced at the time that people thought it was impossible for the Titanic to sink. The vice president of the White Star Line, Philip Franklin, even said publicly, "The Titanic is unsinkable." Everyone believed it. The media spread the claim, and the ship became known as the one that could never sink. Now, let's step inside the Titanic and see what made it so luxurious. At that time, traveling on the Titanic was not just a journey, it was an experience. The ship's interiors were designed to resemble a 5-star hotel. Many said that the Titanic was even better than the best hotels in the world. The wood paneling on the walls was handcarved and polished to shine. Stained glass windows sparkled in the sunlight. There were 2 grand staircases, and one of them, the first-class grand staircase, became iconic. It featured iron railings, gold detailing, and a beautiful glass dome above. This staircase connected several decks and served as a gathering place for wealthy passengers to display their elegant clothing and jewelry. But the Titanic had more than just beautiful rooms. It had facilities that were rare on ships at the time. A heated swimming pool. A Turkish bath for relaxation. An electric bath, considered a modern luxury. A gymnasium with exercise machines. A squash court. A library. 2 barber shops. Restaurants, cafes, and smoking rooms for socializing. One of the restaurants, called the a la carte restaurant, was so exclusive that passengers had to pay extra to dine there. The first-class cabins were decorated with silk curtains, elegant furniture, and the finest bedding. Even second-class cabins were better than first-class accommodations on many other ships. The third-class cabins, though simpler, were still more comfortable than those on most ships of that era. The Titanic cost $7.5 million to build in 1912, around $200 million today. Ticket prices were also high. A first-class ticket, $4,350, about $100,000 today. A second-class ticket, $60, about $1,500 today. Third-class tickets, $15 to $40, around $400 to $1,000 today. The Titanic was a luxury ship, and only the rich could afford first-class tickets. When the Titanic was finally completed, people across the world were excited. It was the largest ship ever built. Famous actors, businessmen, and wealthy families booked their tickets months in advance. Everyone wanted to be part of the Titanic's maiden voyage, its first journey from Southampton, England, to New York City, USA. The Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912. Crowds gathered at the port in Southampton to see the ship off. Families waved goodbye to their loved ones, and photographers captured images of the grand ship as it slowly left the dock. On board were 2,224 passengers and crew members. Among them were some of the wealthiest people in the world, including John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men of the time. Molly Brown, a famous socialite. Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store, and his wife, Ida Straus. There were also many immigrants traveling in third class, hoping to start a new life in America. For them, the Titanic represented hope and opportunity. The journey started smoothly. The ship cruised at a speed of 21.5 knots, about 40 kilometers per hour. Everything seemed perfect. Passengers enjoyed the luxury, relaxed in their cabins, and dined in elegant restaurants. The weather was calm, and the sea looked peaceful. But just 2 days into the voyage, the Titanic received its first ice warning, a message from another ship, warning of icebergs in the North Atlantic. Icebergs were common in that area, especially in April. Still, no one worried. After all, the Titanic was unsinkable, right? By April 14, 1912, the fourth day of the voyage, everything still seemed perfect. The sea was calm, the weather was clear, and passengers were enjoying themselves. But no one knew that this peaceful day would end in a disaster the world would never forget. Throughout April 14th, the Titanic received 7 iceberg warnings from other ships. These messages, sent via Morse code, dots and dashes, warned of large icebergs in the ship's path. However, some of the messages never reached Captain Edward John Smith because they weren't marked as urgent. Others were received by the Marconi wireless operators, who were too busy sending passenger messages and didn't give the warnings much attention. Even the messages that did reach the captain were not taken seriously. Captain Smith believed the Titanic was safe. The ship was advertised as unsinkable, and many people trusted this claim. Despite the warnings, the Titanic continued at full speed, 21.5 knots. The night of April 14th was unusually dark. The moon wasn't visible, and the stars gave little light, making it nearly impossible to spot anything in the distance. The sea was eerily calm, which made things worse. Normally, waves splashing against icebergs helped make them visible, but that night, the water was so smooth that icebergs blended into the darkness. 2 lookout men, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, were stationed in the crow's nest, a high platform above the deck, to keep watch. Unfortunately, they didn't have binoculars because the officer who had them left the ship before departure and forgot to hand them over. This made spotting icebergs even harder. At 11:39 p.m., everything changed. Frederick Fleet, in the crow's nest, saw a dark, massive shape directly in front of the ship. At first, he couldn't tell what it was, but as the Titanic drew closer, he realized it was a huge iceberg. Fleet rang the warning bell 3 times, the signal for danger, then grabbed the phone and called the bridge. He shouted, "Iceberg, right ahead." The officers on the bridge, including First Officer William Murdoch, reacted quickly. "Would you like me to continue from this point, covering the collision and aftermath?" Murdoch ordered the crew to turn the ship to the left and reverse the engines to slow it down. But it was too late. Just 37 seconds after the iceberg was spotted, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic crashed into it. The iceberg was enormous, 200 feet high and 400 feet long. According to researchers, it was about 100,000 years old and weighed around 1.5 million tons. The collision caused pieces of ice to fall onto the Titanic's deck, but the real damage was happening below the waterline. This raises one of the biggest mysteries of the Titanic: how could a piece of ice damage a ship made of solid metal? Let's examine a few important details. The iceberg's weight and strength. Icebergs are not soft like the ice cubes in your drink. They are massive, solid, and have sharp edges that can act like knives. The visible part of the iceberg above water was only a small fraction of its total size. Most of it was underwater, making it extremely heavy and powerful. The Titanic's steel. The ship was made of steel, but the steel used in 1912 was not as strong as the steel we use today. It became brittle in freezing temperatures, and the North Atlantic was icy cold at night. When the iceberg struck, the steel plates cracked instead of bending. The rivets, the metal rivets holding the Titanic's steel plates together, were another problem. Some were made of a weaker material called wrought iron. When the iceberg hit, these rivets popped out, creating gaps in the hull. As the iceberg scraped along the side, it opened 6 narrow holes below the waterline. Though small, these holes allowed water to pour in at an alarming rate. At the time of the collision, most passengers didn't realize anything was wrong. Some felt a slight jolt, others heard a grinding noise as the iceberg scraped the hull. In the first-class dining room, a few joked, "What was that? Did we hit something?" But in the engine room, the crew immediately knew the situation was serious. Water was rushing into the lower decks. The Titanic's watertight compartments were supposed to keep the ship safe, but the iceberg had damaged more compartments than the ship could handle. Scientists believe the iceberg that hit the Titanic began as part of a glacier in Greenland. Over thousands of years, it broke off and drifted into the North Atlantic. By the time it struck the Titanic, it was one of the largest icebergs in the area. Its size and weight made it unstoppable. By midnight, water had flooded the first 5 compartments. This was critical. The Titanic's design could withstand flooding in 4 compartments, but not 5. Captain Smith was informed of the damage and realized the Titanic was in serious trouble. The ship once called unsinkable was now sinking, yet most passengers were still unaware of the danger. In the first-class lounge, the music continued, and people were still talking and laughing. At 12 a.m. on April 15, 1912, just 20 minutes after impact, the situation became dire. Captain Edward John Smith, who had been confident in the ship's safety just hours earlier, now faced the unimaginable: the Titanic was sinking. Captain Smith called an emergency meeting with his senior officers and gave clear orders: begin lowering the lifeboats, send distress signals to nearby ships, calm the passengers, and avoid causing panic. The Titanic had 20 lifeboats, but they were not enough for the 2,224 people on board. The lifeboats could hold only about 1,178 people, leaving over 1,000 with no chance of survival. This was a design flaw. Although the ship was built to carry more lifeboats, the company chose not to include them to keep the deck spacious and visually appealing. As the crew began lowering the lifeboats, Titanic's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bright, started sending distress signals via Morse code. They used CQD, meaning, come quickly, distress, and later used SOS, the newer and more recognizable distress signal. One of these signals was picked up by the RMS Carpathia, a passenger ship about 58 miles, 93 kilometers, away. Carpathia's captain, Arthur Rostron, immediately ordered the crew to change course and head toward the Titanic. At full speed, 70 knots, it would still take them 4 hours to arrive. Meanwhile, other ships, such as the SS Californian, were closer but did not respond in time. The Californian's wireless operator had gone to bed and missed the distress calls. As lifeboats were lowered, confusion and fear spread. Most passengers didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. The ship was still brightly lit, and the band continued to play cheerful music. In first class, some passengers hesitated to leave their luxury surroundings, believing the lifeboats were just a precaution. Third-class passengers had an even harder time. Many were trapped in lower decks and struggled to find their way to safety. Language barriers made matters worse, as many were immigrants who didn't speak English. At 12:30 a.m., the first lifeboat was lowered into the freezing Atlantic Ocean. Though it had space for 65, only 28 people boarded. This pattern repeated throughout the night. Many lifeboats left half empty because people didn't believe the ship was really sinking or thought it was safer to stay aboard. As water poured in, it became clear the watertight compartments wouldn't save the ship. They only extended partway up the ship. Once water reached the top, it spilled into the next compartment. By 1:30 a.m., the bow, front, of the Titanic was fully underwater. The ship tilted forward, and panic spread. As lifeboats filled and were lowered, passengers faced another threat, the freezing water. The North Atlantic's temperature that night was -2 degrees Celsius 28 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. Most passengers and crew who entered the water without lifeboats did not survive. Of the 2,224 people on board, only 705 survived, most of them in lifeboats. Around 2:15 a.m., the situation reached its breaking point, literally. The weight of the flooding water caused the ship to crack. The bow was already underwater, pulling the ship downward, while the stern, back, rose high into the air. The middle section could not withstand the stress. The Titanic broke into 2 pieces. The bow plunged to the ocean floor first. The stern floated briefly, then also sank. By 4 a.m., 2 hours after the Titanic sank, the RMS Carpathia arrived and began rescuing survivors from the lifeboats. The crew worked tirelessly, pulling people from the freezing water. Many survivors were in shock or suffering from hypothermia. Some were too weak to climb aboard and had to be lifted with ropes. By 8:30 a.m., all survivors had been rescued, and the Carpathia set course for New York. The survivors left behind the wreckage of the Titanic and the bodies of more than 1,500 people who had perished. After the Titanic tragedy, the world demanded answers. How could such a grand and unsinkable ship sink? Why were so many lives lost? As investigations began, one controversy came to light, the mysterious role of the SS Californian. It had been just 37 kilometers, 20 miles, from the Titanic when it sank. The Californian, a British steamship, had stopped for the night due to ice warnings and was surrounded by icebergs. Its engines were off, and it was stationary in the cold, quiet ocean. At around 11 p.m., the Californian's crew spotted a large ship in the distance. It was the Titanic. From their deck, they could see its lights. When the Titanic began sinking, its crew launched rocket flares into the sky as a distress signal. These white flares were visible for miles and were meant to alert nearby ships that something was wrong. The crew of the Californian saw these flares. One of their officers, Second Officer Herbert Stone, reported to his captain, Stanley Lord, that he had seen the rockets. Stone also noted that the large ship appeared to be stopped. However, Captain Lord dismissed the situation, assuming it was nothing serious. He believed the ship might be holding a party or celebration, which was not uncommon for wealthy passengers. One of the most critical mistakes made by the Californian was turning off its wireless radio for the night. The wireless operator, Cyril Evans, had gone to bed at 11:30 p.m., shortly before the Titanic began sending distress signals. This decision proved catastrophic. If the Californian's radio had been on, its crew would have heard the Titanic's SOS calls and could have responded immediately. The ship was close enough to reach the Titanic in time to rescue hundreds of passengers who later died in the freezing water. The question remains, could the Californian have truly saved lives? The distance was just 20 miles, a distance it could have covered in about 2 hours. While it might not have arrived before the Titanic sank, it could have rescued many people from the lifeboats and freezing water. The Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m., and the Californian could have reached the site by 2:30 or 3 a.m., far earlier than the RMS Carpathia, which arrived at 4 a.m. Even saving 100 or 200 more lives would have drastically reduced the scale of the tragedy. The controversy surrounding the Californian led to significant changes in maritime practices. 24/7 radio operators, ships were required to keep their wireless radios manned at all times to ensure no distress signals would go unheard. Clear signals, new guidelines were introduced for distress flares, making it clear that rockets in the night sky always meant danger, not celebration. Responsibility to investigate. Ships were instructed to investigate any unusual activity, such as flares on nearby vessels appearing stationary. Captain Stanley Lord's reputation was permanently damaged by the inquiry. He spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name, but the controversy followed him until his death. In 1912, the Titanic was not just a ship, it was a symbol of human ambition, luxury, and dreams. But in one tragic night, all of that was lost to the icy waters of the Atlantic. Even today, over a century later, the Titanic remains one of the most fascinating stories in history. After the Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, it disappeared into the dark depths of the Atlantic Ocean. For decades, no one knew exactly where the ship rested. People could only imagine what it looked like under the sea. Many believed the wreck would never be found, as it had sunk to a depth of 12,500 feet, 3,800 meters, far beyond the reach of most explorers at the time. It wasn't until 1985, 73 years later, that the Titanic was finally discovered. Dr. Robert Ballard, a deep-sea explorer, and his team used advanced technology to find the shipwreck. They sent a robotic submarine to explore the ocean floor, and what they found was breathtaking. The bow, front, of the ship was relatively intact, while the stern, back, was twisted and broken, evidence of the ship splitting in two before it sank. Around the wreck, there were shoes, dishes, luggage, and other personal belongings of the passengers, a haunting reminder of the lives lost. Since its discovery, scientists have studied the wreck and found that it's slowly being destroyed. Bacteria and saltwater are eating away at the metal. According to experts, the Titanic could completely disintegrate by 2030, leaving nothing but memories. Despite this, the fascination with the Titanic continues. It's not just about the ship itself, but what it represents, the ambition to build something extraordinary, the tragedy of overconfidence, and the human stories of survival, loss, and courage. In 2012, To mark the 100th anniversary of the Titanic's sinking, Australian billionaire Clive Palmer announced an ambitious plan to build a modern replica of the Titanic called Titanic 2. Titanic 2 would have the same luxurious design as the original, including grand staircases, elegant dining rooms, and vintage cabins. However, it would include modern safety features such as more lifeboats and advanced navigation systems to ensure history wouldn't repeat itself. The ship was planned to sail on the same route as the original Titanic, from Southampton to New York. While the project generated a lot of excitement, it has faced delays and challenges. To this day, Titanic 2 has not been completed. But the idea shows how deeply the Titanic's legacy lives on in people's hearts. 705 people survived, most of whom were women and children. Over 1,000 men perished as they gave up their spots on lifeboats for others. The Titanic taught the world many lessons. Overconfidence can be dangerous. People believed the Titanic was unsinkable. This overconfidence led to mistakes such as not having enough lifeboats and ignoring ice warnings. Respect nature. The iceberg was a reminder that nature is powerful and unpredictable. Even the most advanced human creations can be humbled by the forces of nature. Plan for the worst. The Titanic disaster changed safety regulations forever. Ships are now required to have enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Radios must be manned 24/7, and safety drills are mandatory. The Titanic story is a mix of glamour, tragedy, and mystery. People are drawn to it because it feels like a cautionary tale about human ambition and arrogance. The ship's wreck at the bottom of the ocean is like a time capsule, preserving a moment in history. But more than anything, it's the stories of the people on board, their bravery, sacrifices, and humanity that keep the Titanic alive in our hearts. The Titanic story is not just about loss. It's about learning and growing. Here's what we can take away. Never give up. The survivors of the Titanic faced unimaginable trauma, but many went on to rebuild their lives. Their resilience is an inspiration to us all. Always be prepared. Life is unpredictable. Whether it's a shipwreck or a personal challenge, being prepared can make all the difference. Learn from mistakes. The Titanic's tragedy led to new safety standards that have saved countless lives. Mistakes are not the end, they are opportunities to grow and improve. And so, the mystery of the Titanic is not just a story of a ship, it's a story of humanity. It's a reminder of what we can achieve and what we must avoid. If this story inspired you, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Learning true stories not only improves your English, but also fills your heart with wisdom and motivation. Thank you for watching. Let's keep learning and growing together. Subscribe now for more heart-touching English stories that improve your language naturally. Learn new words, phrases, and expressions effortlessly through storytelling. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Your English journey starts here, one story at a time.